Speaking of is made possible by listeners like you. Thank you for supporting Milwaukee PBS.
You're listening to Speaking Of, a podcast by Milwaukee PBS. I'm Scottie Lee Myers, your co-host, and today we are continuing our story about a Black History Month resolution written mostly by a group of diverse high school students that proved to be too controversial for the city of Brookfield, a suburb just west of Milwaukee. And we're unpacking this story to better understand the resistance from white communities from being more diverse and inclusive spaces. This is part 2 of a 3-part story, so if you haven't yet listened to part 1, I would strongly urge you to go back and do that. Everything will make a lot more sense. In the studio with me are fellow producers Mariano Avila and Alexandria Mack.
Hey.
And somewhere behind the curtain is our incredible sound engineer, Grant Martin. And we have gathered for another roundtable as I continue to lead us through today's episode. Let's just do a quick recap. What do you remember about part 1? Who are sort of our main characters? And
Hallquist, yeah.
Jinx.
Yes, Hallquist. He's basically our central figure. He's young, he's white, he's a new elected common council member living and serving in the city of Brookfield.
This is the guy that, was the Brookfield Beto Democrat and, in a punk rock band.
Nailed it, absolutely. That's a good memory, Mariano.
And if I'm not mistaken, Hallquist was really inspired by this group of high school students in Brookfield who led Black Lives Matter protests in the city after the killing of George Floyd.
Yep, and those were significant protests because Brookfield is predominantly a white and conservative community. I think we heard in the last episode of a protester there who was on the scene. He was in his 50s or 60s, and he says something to the effect of, I never thought I would have seen this in Brookfield. And I think, myself included, we were really surprised to see a Black Lives Matter presence in the city of Brookfield.
Which inspired Hallquist, right?
Right, yep.
So he's the one that invited the group of high school students to write a resolution for the city of Brookfield to recognize February as Black History Month.
Exactly, because Brookfield didn't formally recognize Black History Month. And by the way, let's quickly say the names of those students. They are Jana Guerra, Rihanna Hassan, Langston Ford, Cynthia Liu, and Jose Zapien Guerra. He didn't want to be interviewed for this story. And in January 2021, they all got together and wrote a Black History Month resolution.
And it wasn't really a fluffy resolution. It calls out things like slavery, segregation, mass incarceration, housing discrimination, and redlining.
Yeah, right. And so the resolution, it's written. Now it's time to take that written resolution that those students drafted, and they're taking it to the Brookfield Common Council for a vote. So that's where we left off. Now it's time for the next chapter.
All right, that's a good recap. Let's turn the page.
Yeah, all right, turning the page. Here we go. Now we fast forward to Tuesday, February 16th. This is the night that the Common Council meets, and part of the agenda includes voting on that Black History Month resolution that we were just talking about, the one that was written by the students and Hallquist. And this is where things get a little technical, but it's not too confusing, so just, stay with me here, okay?
All right, well, we'll track with you.
So before the resolution goes before the Common Council meeting for a vote, it first has to go through a committee. That's the Legislative and Licensing Committee, to be exact. By the way, Hallquist, he's not on that committee, just an FYI.
Okay, well, I will call this meeting to order. This is the Legislative and Licensing meeting.
And that meeting happens literally right before the Common Council meeting. So committee meeting at 6 p.m., council meeting at 7.
Got it.
That's it, right. So, okay, we're in the committee meeting. No one is expecting any hiccups here. I mean, we're talking about a resolution. This is pretty standard stuff. It happens all the time. So it's getting towards the end of the committee meeting, and finally the Black History Month resolution comes up. And the chair of the committee, Alderman Gary Maycorn, we're going to hear from him more in this story, but in an unusual move, he gives the floor to Mayor Steve Ponta, whom I'll add is not a member of this committee. He just kind of randomly shows up out of the blue.
And then the mayor immediately and completely to everyone's surprise, the mayor starts in and introduces his proclamation, his counter proclamation. Unbeknownst to us,
So what just happened?
Okay, so basically, the mayor looked at the resolution that Hallquist and the students wrote, and he's like, no, not going to happen. And so he writes and submits an alternative resolution, but, well, technically it's not a resolution, it's a proclamation because it's from the mayor. But he thinks that what he writes is just way more appropriate.
Did he actually say that, or?
Well, okay, so what Mayor Ponto actually said is that it's important to recognize and celebrate the many achievements of Black Americans, but that parts of the resolutions by the students had negative comments. Here's what he said at the meeting.
I believe the city of Brookfield should proclaim the month of February Black History Month. However, I believe that all city of Brookfield proclamations that have been adopted while I've been mayor have been very positive in tone. And I think that the parts of the resolution that were drafted by the students had negative comments. And if they're writing a book, that's fine to include the negative things. But when you're putting the city of Brookfield on the line, I think it should be a positive document.
So that's Mayor Ponto. That's what he had to say about this resolution that the students wrote.
So a Black History Month resolution that is positive is what he's asking for.
Yes.
So then what happens?
Okay, so then there's some discussion of the two resolutions, and eventually committee member Alderman Brad Bloomer, he motions to approve the original resolution that Hallquist and the students drafted. But his motion for a vote goes unseconded.
So does that mean it's off the table? It's gone forever?
Okay, so what that means is basically you have to follow certain parliamentary procedures. Basically,
Robert's rules.
Robert's rules, you nailed it. It's a series of rules about turn taking when making policy decisions. So by making the motion, Bloomer is like, okay, y'all, enough discussion. Let's vote on this thing. Let's vote on the original Black History Month resolution written by the students. But his fellow committee members leave him hanging. They just stay silent. So with no one offering a second, it can't go to a vote. And so then a different committee member says, well, let's vote on the mayor's proclamation. And that does get seconded. And so it goes to a vote.
So just to be clear, that is the version that removes all the negative connotations of racism and calling out the specific issues.
Exactly. Yep. This is the vote on the mayor's alternative version. And the Legislative and Licensing Committee unanimously recommend approval of the mayor's revision. And now it's ready to be put in front of the Common Council for final approval in an hour at the next meeting.
So I want to back up a little bit. The reason I want to back up is because procedurally speaking, what happened there is that they did not want to vote down the resolution from these students. So instead of voting it down, they sidestepped it.
And I am just kind of guessing here, but I'm assuming because they don't want that on their record that they voted that down. So this is a way where they don't have to have it on their record that they voted against the students' version.
Put another way, the way to sidestep this resolution from the students, the only way to sidestep it without voting it down would be to make sure that everybody's in agreement that it doesn't get seconded, so it never gets on the floor for a vote.
Agreed. Probably no one on that council wanted to read a headline the following morning that says, Brookfield Common Council fails in committee meeting to approve a Black History Month resolution, right?
Written by Black students.
Exactly. So they had to devise a strategy that allowed them to circumvent that, which included this alternate resolution from the mayor. Now, what does that mean for the students' resolution?
Whereas, despite all the progress, the legacy of slavery and segregation still persists in our nation, in the forms of mass incarceration, the school-to-prison pipeline, racial profiling, educational inequalities, housing and employment discrimination, racism, and bias.
By the historical use of redlining, restricted access to FHA loans, which resulted in the underrepresentation of Black families in these communities.
Diverse families continues to enhance the quality of life for all residents in the city of Brookfield. Now therefore, be it resolved, the Common Council of Brookfield recognizes February 2021 to be Black History.
Basically, the students' resolution is dead. It is dead. Only the mayor's version prevails. That's all there is.
So how are Hallquist and the students feeling once that happens?
Hallquist, he's mad. He's frustrated because from his viewpoint, this came out of nowhere. He submitted the original resolution weeks ago. So there was ample time for the mayor or any of his colleagues that could have came up to him and expressed some concern or just given him a heads up about what was going to happen. But instead, he got backdoored.
So if they would have had a conversation with him, there could have been time to make edits and things of that nature, kind of a compromise. But he's saying that didn't happen at all.
Exactly. And Hallquist definitely seemed open for some edits, or at least to have that conversation. Here he is again.
To have that resolution be rejected in favor of something that was wrote by one person in secret, clear that this was wrote to derail the work that kind of our group had put together. So it's very frustrating.
So do you have the differences between the two kind of laid out? Do you know?
So how is the mayor's proclamation different? I asked Hallquist that very question, and he neither hesitated nor held back.
This is an easy one. Whitewashed. The mayor's proclamation was probably the literal definition of whitewashed. And the problem I have with that is you cannot recognize Black achievement without understanding the context by which it was delivered, because that's what makes it even that much more remarkable. It's not like Brookfield was the only community that had these things. This happened nationwide. The difference I wanted to set was Brookfield was going to acknowledge it, right? And instead, we get a proclamation wrote by one person, which, again, whitewashes and revises history to say, let's put a quote-unquote positive spin. I'm not here for that. It's not my job to put a positive spin on racism. It's my job to tell the truth. I take that very seriously.
Ah, yes, the positive spin on racism.
There's the quote.
There you go.
There it is. We heard that last time.
So I should also add that the mayor's version is shorter. All that historical context was stripped out. All the stuff about slavery and segregation and mass incarceration, housing discrimination, all of that is gone. Here's how Langston describes the mayor's proclamation.
It was like a revisionist history. It wasn't anything we wanted. It felt like it was something a company had published, and it was superficial, and it was supposed to be, just most boring blanket statement that doesn't mean anything to anyone.
So I should also add that the last paragraph of the Mayor's Black History Month proclamation, it thanks each of the high school students by name, commending them for their interest in government and inspiring this recognition. And that did not go over well with the students. Here's Cynthia.
I don't really want my name on a document that I think is dangerous, that I think whitewashes history and just is revisionist history in general. It's dangerous. There's no way to learn from the past, as I was saying, unless we acknowledge it and we take accountability. And none of that happened. And it feels almost like a slap in the face that something that we work towards, something that we believe in, was everything we believe in was stripped. All of this historical fact was stripped from the document, and then our names were just plastered on it.
Okay, back to City Hall that Tuesday night, February 16th. The committee meeting wraps up.
Okay.
Move to adjourn.
You're just in time for the adjournment. Oh, great. Do I hear a second for the adjournment?
Second.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
We're adjourned.
So again, recap. Mayor's version lives on, students' version dead. We're leaving the committee meeting. Now we're going to the larger Common Council meeting.
This meeting of the City of Brookfield Common Council will come to order.
And as these meetings do, it started with a 15-minute public comment period where anyone can go up and basically say whatever they want.
We'll begin with a 15-minute segment in which members of the public may address the council on any matter that is not the subject of a public hearing.
And pretty much right out of the gate, all the attention is on the Black History Month recognition, as you probably imagine. Cynthia, Jaina, and Langston, they're all at the meeting, and they've all signed up to speak. Cynthia was the first to take the mic, and she was fired up.
I was definitely not happy. I was shocked, upset, pretty angry that something like this was just pulled with no transparency.
So here are her actual comments from the meeting.
So we have a few people who registered in advance. The first one is Cynthia Liu. Would you go to the podium, please, state your name and address and make your comment? And we ask that comments be limited to 3 minutes.
Miss Cynthia Liu. First and foremost, we must understand that building a better future begins with understanding the past. There is no progress without a full, complete, and accurate picture of the past, and there is no way to learn and improve from false history. Statistically, factually, Wisconsin's history is rife with systemic racism. Redlining does exist, and it is a fact that our historical infrastructure still exists today, prompting Wisconsin to be one of the worst states in the country for racial equality. Our state economy ranks last. 4 in 10 Black children are living in poverty. We have the highest racial achievement gap between Black and white students in the nation. Our prisons incarcerate the highest proportion of Black men in the United States. The median income for a Black household is half of what a white household earns annually. And the rate of infant deaths for Black babies is nearly 3 times that as white infants. Here today, we want to build bridges, but we cannot build bridges without a solid foundation. We cannot build bridges on corroding land, on false facts. Today, the city has chosen to alter the original resolution, to ignore factual pieces of evidence, and to only focus on the positives. And to this, I must say that I am disheartened and disappointed. I vehemently wish that this city today had chosen to do better, to recognize our past, to take responsibility, and to fully and deeply celebrate Black History Month.
So that's a high school student. That's
Mic
Cynthia.
drop.
Whoa.
Wow.
I mean, talk about putting together an argument and articulating that on a public stage.
How long did she have between when this happened and her speech?
It's a great question, right? Because they literally just left the committee meeting. And so she was rewriting that speech in her head. I mean, we're talking just minutes later.
Wow. I don't think this is the last time we're going to hear from her. She has a bright future ahead for sure. Because especially with that amount of passion that she felt, she was very level-headed and very clear and concise in her point.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so now after Cynthia, it's Jana's turn to speak.
I'll be honest, I was like on the verge of tears because I was just upset with everything that was going on. And my voice was shaking a lot when I was speaking because I was speaking in front of this very large group.
And here she is, Jana, addressing the council that night.
Okay, the next person is Jana Garia.
Hi, I'm Jana Gria. Although our resolution may seem more negative, we based our resolution on many others, and we did focused and detailed research to create this resolution. Our resolution was not meant to target. It was to help our community move forward. We wrote this resolution as a group of minorities and is about making a more positive future for us. The issues of our past are not gone. It is the fact that the legacy of slavery and segregation still persists in our country in forms of mass incarceration, the school-to-prison pipeline, racial profiling, educational inequalities, housing and employment discrimination, racism, and bias. I do not want my name put on a resolution that I do not support and that does not address the real issues.
So that was Jana's speech, and she says that she felt like her voice was shaking. I don't really hear it. She sounds really strong there in her comments. And then the last person to talk was Langston.
I was nervous, but I felt like this was something I had to do, and I was mad, and I wanted to make a speech that they would remember. I put stuff like how you're going to be on the wrong side of history and how there's no diversity and inclusion here.
And here's a snippet of Langston's comments from that night. I'll note that he started his remarks by going back in time to 1619 and then chronicling the country's racial sins over the centuries. I'm going to pick it up towards the end of his statement.
The next person is Langston Ford.
The list of oppressions I have detailed is a brief yet horrific account of our history. Affirming the original proclamation is quite literally the bare minimum you could have done, and you collectively failed at that. The Brookfield community has consistently failed the Black community. And when I say the Brookfield community, I mean the white community and everyone in this building right now except for me and my two peers. Again, look around and see who everyone in this building is. If Brookfield continues to fail communities like this, you will be on the wrong side of history.
So a quick point on Langston's last comment. Essentially, he's telling people who are listening to him in the room to look around and that the only Black and brown faces that you will see are the students who wrote the original resolution. Everyone else in that room was a white person. So that's a sampling of the students and their speeches during the public comment period.
Wow.
But they weren't the only ones to talk during that public comment period. There is also Chris Vanderblumen. She's a Brookfield resident.
The next person is Christine Vanderblumen.
Hi, Chris Vanderblumen. I first want to make a note that it is extremely hard to hear you guys with your masks on. If you could speak into the microphone, that would help a lot. I do need a hearing aid, too.
You kind of get the sense that she shows up to a lot of these things, and she goes on to say that the council should vote against any kind of Black History Month resolution. Here she is.
I don't approve and don't think we need a resolution to designate any month for any special race or designation for any citizen. Why do we have to single out one segment? What is the necessity of that? I believe it divides rather than unites all citizens. Skin color should not determine the value of a human being. This summer was spent tearing down, burning down, and erasing American history and our founders. If we need a designation for anything, I think we need a designation to bring back the people that built up our country. because they did a lot for us. They did a lot wrong too, but they did a lot of things for America. If you are going to make a resolution for one race, you should do it for all. The main thing I don't like is I'm sick of them dividing us into groups. We need to have unity and stop having all this division. Thank you.
So that was Christine Vanderblumen, who spoke during the public comment period.
Did I hear correctly that she's essentially calling for a non-division of races, but saying that African-American history is not one worth talking about?
You know, the one thing that stood out to me, that's an interesting question, Mariano, but, you know, she talks about this erasure of history that happened in the summer in wake of these protests, which you can have a fair debate about. It's exactly what some of the students in Halquist are suggesting is happening in the chambers of City Hall here, is that by not acknowledging, by not passing their originally drafted resolution that mentions slavery and Jim Crow and all these other things, like, they're sort of alleging that the city of Brookfield is the one doing the erasure of history. So that's kind of interesting too, I think. This is going to be an anecdotal, but I was born and raised in Brookfield, and my family still lives there. I spent a lot of time there. I have a lot of loved ones and friends in there. And I would probably say Christine, her comments are not an anomaly, right? Like, she's representative of a viewpoint that I think a lot of people in Brookfield hold.
Yeah, I think what the students in their resolution were trying to say is, like, these are things that aren't talked about. And people who hold the viewpoint of Christine are saying, well, why do we have to talk about it? And if you're in the classroom, in a predominantly white classroom at that, and these issues that people of color and Black people specifically are facing aren't addressed as something that is still going on, it feels like you're invisible, or that everyone is kind of in denial and you're the only one facing the issue at hand. So clearly, Christine wasn't in support of the resolution, but I think I'd be interested to see how the students respond to those kind of criticisms under pressure.
Well, before we hear from the students, we're actually going to hear from Halquist, because he's next.
Okay, Alderman Halquist, would you like to speak?
And it's a little unusual that he would choose to speak during this public comment time, because he's going to get plenty of time to voice his opinion later in the meeting when the mayor's proclamation goes up for a vote.
I wanted 3 minutes of uninterrupted time to be very frank and to be very specific with my colleagues about how I felt about what I just saw.
Here he is.
So my name is Mike Halquist. I'm uniquely disappointed tonight. The idea that this community is past racism is, quite frankly, complete and utter nonsense. I know many folks here actively campaign, as they should, for office. Let me tell you what that manifestation looks like door to door. It's people who say, well, you know, crime increased when we added the bus stops. It's people who say, I'm campaigning tough on crime because I got to keep the Milwaukee crowd out of Brookfield. It's people who essentially dog whistle with their policies and actions when they campaign, or in their actions in the Common Council, that still show signs that we need to change. It's also from residents who object to more affordable housing and multi-tenant residencies. The idea that racism doesn't exist in this community, unfortunately, much in many communities, is not true. I'm sorry, the mayor says we want a more positive light for a proclamation. There is nothing positive or great about the history of racism in this country. I'm sorry, it's terrible behavior. It's awful, it's reprehensible, it should be admonished as such. I'm really at a loss for words at how disappointed I am. Trust me, you'll get a much longer response than this later. But, you know, I'm thinking of stories that people tell me either involved with this or previous. You know, it's someone in my network who has a son in first grade was told he had poopy skin in first grade. It's a resident who bought a home near my home who felt the need that the previous buyer highlighted that the family with Black children were very nice and harmless. These are real examples. So I think you've made a big mistake tonight, and I will write much more about this, much more articulately. You've caught me a bit off guard. But let it be known that you have to account for the past, and the past is ugly. And the thing that makes this country particularly great is we can acknowledge that and move forward. And we have not done that tonight, and we will not do that tonight. Lastly, I'll leave on one bit. So this resolution came about by looking at other examples from across the country. There is a body, you may have heard of it, the United States Senate. They're not known to particularly agree on much, but last year they did manage to write a bipartisan resolution supporting Black History Month. All presidents since Bill Clinton actually have had a proclamation recognizing Black History Month almost annually. Much of the language is very similar, unsurprising, to the resolution that was put forth to the Legislative and Licensing Committee.
And let me tell you something. Hallquist ends his public comment with a bona fide mic drop.
So I would just say that the past is ugly, and sometimes you have to recognize that to move forward. You've sent the opposite message that we could have sent to this community tonight, and I'm thankful that I'm young, so I will live long enough to see that pan out as this community becomes more diverse and more welcoming over time.
So in our interview, I asked him if he regretted anything that he said during that public comment period.
I found this so troubling that I have a hard time even talking about it as articulately as I would like. But, I stand by that statement 100%. This community is continuing to be diverse and will continue to be more diverse, and its attitudes over time are going to become more positive about this, whether or not a bunch of cranky individuals want to approve of it or not.
The meeting rolls on. There's some discussion about a tailgating permit for a church fundraiser, claims of excessive tax assessments, budgets, contract, and then the agenda item we're all waiting for.
The next item is item 28.
Item 28, the Legislative and Licensing Committee's report on the proposed Black History Month resolution. And Alderman Makhorn, the chair of the committee that met just before this, he provides a short synopsis of what happened with the resolution in that previous meeting.
The Legislative and Licensing Committee met tonight and discussed the proposal that was offered by Alderman Hellquist and the students from Brookfield East and Brookfield Central. And there was also discussion about the proclamation as offered by the mayor that everybody should have a copy of as well. And the committee unanimously voted to approve and accept the proclamation by the mayor of the city of Brookfield.
Then the discussion begins, and the first council member to weigh in is Alderman Rick Owen. And let me just say this, Hallquist, he was not shy when I asked for his reaction to what his colleague, Alderman Owen, said.
I thought it was an absurd statement. I thought it belonged back in 1950, along with all the other terrible policies that were mentioned in the resolution. I think Alderman Owen's comments are timeless for all the wrong reasons.
So what did the guy say that was so timeless?
I'll tell you what he said on the next episode of Speaking Of. I'm Scottie Lee Myers.
I'm Mariano Ávila.
And I'm Alexandria Mack. Thank you for listening.